Hey everyone! Welcome to Reddit Junkie. Today's video is on Picasso said, learn the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist. How does this approach apply to your specific field or expertise? So let's jump into it. Picasso said, learn the rules like a pro, so you can break them like an artist. How does this approach apply to your specific field or expertise? Architecture. You need to comprehend the regulations, requirements, briefs and technicalities to be able to execute your design ideas around them. You can only think out of the box, if you know limits of the box. And then the structural engineer has to cram everything back into the box or rearrange what the box is, or build another box so the whole damn thing doesn't come crashing down. And then the construction team has to actually go build it. If do you mean the framework needs 12 different radi for this curve? How many penetrations do they want in the too thick wall we just poured with embedded conduit? So you want us to tear out this multi-million-dollar piece of equipment we just set because you didn't design the connections to the wall? I have mixed feelings about this sentiment. I started learning architecture at a technical college where its focus was on drafting. It was so boring, and I felt myself just designing functional buildings with little concept. Then later I went to university, where the theory units included parts of art history and culture. I had so much idea to bounce off and my designs looked better after. Then again, some schools teach only conceptual design theory that you come out with zero technical knowledge, or you studied technical knowledge that you'll never use outside of that class. Yep. A college math professor from long ago once told me, in order to think outside of the box, you need to know what that box looks like and how it was made. Nah. Architecture rewards mediocrity at every turn. Architects will spend hours navel-gazing a concept, and then turn around and design a literal box. A box with burnt timber cladding. My so is an architect, and that's why she said she loves Vegas. A lot of those limits are from budget restrictions. Vegas hotels don't have that same problem. Let's make a floating hotel over a river. So this is why architects make my life harder every day? Because all of you always think outside the box? Sounds inside the box, but go ahead. I guess there are many boxes, one of them is psychological and you draw the limits. The better way to say it is the box had a lot more nooks and crannies to fill once you realize it's not exactly square. Outside the box represents no constraints which, in the end, the constraints often form a better result because they represent what you want as well as what is possible with a certain approach. But how do you break the box? The box doesn't necessarily needs to be broken. I remember a quote from an engineering professor I read that went along the lines of, in this field, you'll make a modest living and retire at a good age if you design with safety at the front. Anything else, and you will kill people. I expect most of those out-the-box ideas feature glass, chrome and wood paneling on the exterior of buildings. It seems all new buildings follow that pattern. How is there a constant need for architecture? Haven't hundreds of millions of designs been made? Why would people pay to have some new design when they could get something that's already been proven? I can understand why there would be a few rich idiots wanting to show off, but how is this sustainable outside of that? Every housing development has a specific set of constraints that requires an architect to ensure the design maintains compliance. Things like maximum building height, lot coverage, setbacks from property lines, etc. all needing an architect usually, even the most typical, barring repeatable builds. Edit, not an architect, but work with them often. Don't forget differing earthwork conditions, utility hookups, and endangered species considerations. That's getting into the engineering parts, but then the architects have to deal with the stuff the engineers tell them. I draw cartoons as a hobby. People are often surprised that I can draw real pictures. Knowing how to draw realistically helps me with cartoons, because I know how to do body proportions, facial expressions, hair texture, body language, fabric, and how to minimalize a complex drawing into cartoon form. I once heard a style is making a mistake consistently on purpose. I knew this to be true, and even more now that I started animating. Drawing consistently is hard, and it relies on the artist knowing the rules of shapes and proportions. Like I'm still a fucking amateur even with hundreds of hours under my belt. I find myself constantly practicing facial proportions and figures in between animating projects now because so much of it relies on, well, reality. Even if it is a cartoon style, if you superpose any of my drawings over a photo of a real human, it's easy to see that the rules are all there. Like I wish I could draw as minimalistic as other artists. That's why pixel artists astound me. I can draw semi-realism any day now. But pixel art? How are y'all able to reduce everything down to something that is still recognizable with a few bits of color and data? Just amazing. In computer programming, if you know the low-level nuts and bolts for how the computer works, you can know when to selectively ignore best practices for the sake of getting a slim, sexy optimization working. Example, a friend of mine working with graphics drivers found that he could eke out improved turnaround on frame flipping by having the writer for the next frame trail the reader for the frame before it as they scanned the same block of memory. So at any given time, that block of memory would actually contain portions of two separate frames, and the only thing keeping the pictures looking right was the fact that he could assume one piece of code would never catch up to the other. Yet, a lot of modern computer programming is using the correct pattern for the problem. But depending on the specifics of the problem, sometimes the right pattern is not the best solution, and even when it is, there are minor implementation details and choices that can make or break it. Been writing and designing software for almost 40 years. I've seen a lot of best practices that aren't, but one that always is don't waste time. Not the user's time, not the computer's time, and if possible not your time. Bioinformatics is the art of being super lazy. Don't want to run more lab experiments to figure out a thing? Just work out a novel way to analyze the data you already have from doing something else unrelated to the question at hand, or even someone else's data that you have lying around. Or, as I like to remind my boss during budget discussions, lab work is expensive, computer time is cheap. Super random, but is there much work in this field? Looking at doing my postgrad in this area. Languages. You can't master hyper-casual slang and shitty puns unless you've achieved some fluency. Interesting, I teach middle school and have English language learners who do not speak fluent English and cannot read at grade level, etc., but are experts in General Z slang because that's the language they use to communicate with their peers with. As a non-native English speaker, I can totally relate. You realize that you actually can speak the language not when you stop making mistakes, but when you learn to make them on purpose. I used to work in IT and there is a skill to slacking off. It's a stressful environment, but when you kinda know what your performance targets are, you can game the system a little bit and do just enough work to fly under the radar and not be bothered much. Working from home has been such a treat for people working in IT. Offices are generally quite rude and abusive towards programmers and coders. Depends on the environment. I've worked in software where the devs were the backbone of the company and highly respected. I was in sales and seen as dispensable. I've also worked in offices where the devs are treated like aliens. My sales position, however, was seen as more vital. Weird. Okay, now you're giving away the secret to IT. That depends. If the company you are working for are using simple systems or develop what I call launch and forget website or systems, the turnover can be pretty high because the maintenance cost is pretty low. However, with ever-changing complex systems, you don't treat programmers like shit, especially when it takes a full year for them to learn how the system works globally. When someone says it's a bad idea because of this, this and this, and all the others agree, you shut your mouth and you listen to them. Unless you want a catastrophic global crash. And having to explain to the board and the finance why the costs suddenly skyrocket while IT releases the archived emails and Teams conversation to back up their claim that it was a fucking bad idea. Of letting a junior programmer from a third-party company bypassing a secured API to insert data manually into a table without sanitizing the data first.